Hello and welcome to yet another tutorial by Davies Media Design. My name is Michael Davies, and in today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you guys how to master the Paths tool using GIMP. This is GIMP version 2.10.6, which at the time of this tutorial is the latest version of GIMP. Before we get into that, I want to direct you guys over to my website at daviesmediadesign.com. As always, we have tons of GIMP video and text tutorials on here, as well as Project Translate. You can watch one of our GIMP playlists, support us on Patreon, or view our poll of the week results, so definitely check those items out. We're also launching something called GIMP School, and this is going to include a series of live online presentations featuring myself, and we'll be going over various GIMP concepts, and you guys will be able to ask questions directly during these live presentations. And you can check these out by going to gimpschool.com, and that will take you to the latest live presentations available. And for this tutorial and for future tutorials, I'll be including discount links to these GIMP School sessions, so definitely check those out. You can also enroll in our GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher on Udemy. And you can support us on Patreon and help our channel grow, and I'll include a link to this as well as all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description of the video. So today's tutorial is all about the Paths tool, and you can access it by hitting B on your keyboard, or you can click on it over here in your toolbox. The Paths tool allows you to create curves called Bezier curves, which are saved to a path in the Paths dialog. The Paths dialog is located over here near the Layers area, so you can click on this tab right here and that'll take you to your Paths dialog. If you don't see this, you can open it by going to Windows, Dockable Dialogs, Paths, and when you click on that, that should open this up right here. So there are a lot of reasons why paths are super useful. For one, you can draw a path and come back and reuse that path at a later time within your composition. You could bring paths into other compositions, and you could do things like stroke the path, fill the path, or create a selection from the path. And we're going to get into all those concepts as we move through this tutorial. So I'm going to show you guys how to design this. I also have this other design here that I did using the Paths tool, and I'm going to show you guys how to do this on my Patreon page, so all of my patrons will have a chance to watch that tutorial. But this is the photo I use for both tutorials, and you guys will see here in my composition that I do have a path here. And notice that as I cycle between my different compositions, the Paths dialog is going to update based on what paths are in that composition. This composition doesn't have any paths, so that's why this is blank. And if I unhide this composition, which is a characteristic of paths, you can hide or unhide them. So if I unhide that, you'll see that this path outlines the girl, and an active path or a path that is no longer hidden will be displayed in red, as you can see here. And when you have your path tool selected and you click on a path, that's going to make that an active path. And if I zoom in here, you'll see that there's little dots here. These are called anchor points. In between the anchor points is a segment. Segments can be straight or curved, and you can curve them by using the handles, and we're going to get into that as I draw with this. And this is a closed path, so the first and last anchor points that I drew here are both connected, and that allows me to do various things like create a selection from this path, as well as fill the path or stroke the path. And you can see over here in my tool options, you have all the tool options for the Paths tool. You have Design, Edit, and Move as your edit modes, and we'll get into all those. Polygonal just means when that's checked that your path will not create any curves. So right now I cannot create curves from this segment. It can only be a straight line. And that can come in handy when you don't want any curves in whatever shape you're drawing. And then here you have your options for selecting the path, filling the path, or stroking the path, which we're going to get into. You can also rename this path, so I can come over here and just name this girl outline and hit enter. So I just double clicked on this name, and that allowed me to change the name of the path. If you come over here, it's kind of like the layers panel, so you can create a new path here. You can duplicate the path, you can change the order of the path, so if you have multiple paths here, you can move them up and down in the stacking order. You can create a selection from the path, which is called Path to Selection, and you'll notice there are some shortcut keys here, and these are for the selection tools. So if I come over to a selection tool here, you'll see that there's different modes here, and we've gone over these in my other tutorials. So you've got the replace the current selection mode, and that just means every time you draw a selection, whatever you draw will replace whatever used to be there. Then you've got add to selection, so when you draw with this, you'll see that each time you draw a shape, it's going to add to your previous shape. Then you've got subtract from the current selection, and that just means when you draw a shape that intersects with your current shape, that'll just erase that section that's intersecting from that shape. And then you have intersect with the current selection, and that is only going to keep the areas that intersect between the existing path and the new path you just drew, which in this case is this area. So you can also do that over here with the paths by holding any of these hotkeys here that you can see here when you hover over. And let me just hit Control-Shift-A to select none. You can also do what's called selection to path, which means whenever you draw a selection area like I just did here with the rectangle select tool, when you click this option here, and let me make sure I have my mode set to replace the current selection at least. So now when I have a selection area drawn here, if I click this option, it's going to turn that selection area into a path, as you can see here. So now we have a square. Then you have the option to stroke a path, so you could stroke along this path, and we're going to get into that. And then you could delete a path, so right here, if I want to delete this rectangle path that I drew, which I do want to do that, I'll just click this icon, and now that path has been deleted. So I'll hit Control-Shift-A. So now let's get into using the actual paths tool. So I'm going to come back over here to my paths tool, and I'm going to do what I did here, which is outline this girl. And so I'll come over here to my layers, and I'm going to just delete the stroke layer here. You'll notice I have two layers right here, and these are just duplicates of one another. And let me just delete this duplicate. So what I did here, this is the original photo that you started with, and by the way, this will be on Pixabay, and I'll include a link to that in the description. So when you open up your image, it's just going to have this, and let me come back to my paths dialog and hide my path. So this is what your image will look like before you do anything with your paths tool. So the reason I duplicated this, which I can duplicate it over here in my layers panel by clicking the duplicate icon right here. And we can rename these Girl Portrait and Girl Portrait Light. So this is my duplicated layer. What I like to do before I use the path tool, whenever I'm using a picture that has some shadows, like in this case you can't really see what's going on in the shadows here, is I like to brighten up the image, and that way I can see what's going on here. And there's a couple ways to do that. I can go to Colors, Shadows, Highlights, or I can go to Colors, Levels. And so in this case, I'll just go to Levels because that's what I did last time and it works pretty well. And now I'm just turning up the level so that I could see what's going on in these shadows, and this just makes it easier for me to outline whatever object it is I'm trying to outline with the Paths tool. And I'll click OK. So now I'll come over and grab our Paths tool, which on my channel is called the Ken Brewer Paths tool, thanks to our Diamond member Patreon supporter Ken Brewer. So using this tool to start, what I like to do is I hold Control on my keyboard and zoom in with my mouse wheel, and I'm going to just click a random part of my image. So in this case, I'll just click right here. So when you click, it'll first create an anchor point. And now I'm going to create my second anchor point here, and that's going to create a segment. And right now I have this set to polygonal mode, so let me hit Control Z, uncheck that option, and this will allow me to make this a curve. So what I'm going to do now is re-click for that second anchor point. I'm still holding my mouse as I'm clicking, and I'm just going to drag this, and that is allowing me to create these two boxes here, which are called handles, and the handles are what control the curves of your anchor points. Now I can continue on drawing this path from this anchor point. So the anchor point that is hollow in the center, or basically just has an outline around the circle, is your active anchor point. So I'll zoom out here, and I'll just move over to this anchor point. You'll see this one does not have a stroke around it, or is not hollow in the center, so that means that is not active. But if I click on this, that is now the active anchor point for my path. And whatever active anchor point you have selected, as long as it is not a closed loop, you can start drawing off of that active anchor point. So you'll see now I can draw my curves off of this anchor point, but I'll hit Control Z because I do want to draw off of this anchor point over here. So I'll just click on that, and then I'll come over here and continue drawing. So you'll see that when I click, my curve is sort of out of whack here because I just want it to follow what she's wearing here. I don't want it to go way out like this, but because this anchor point here has a curve, you'll see the handle right here is way out. What I can do is just work on this handle, and now I can drag that in, and that allows me to reset the curve so that it now follows the girl's arm right here. And we're going to come back once we finish sort of a rough outline of the girl, and we're going to tweak these curves. So I typically just leave curves that are out of whack like that, but I'm just going to continue drawing here. So I'm clicking and dragging, and you'll see that as I drag, it'll add a curve to that anchor point or to that segment. And I'm just going to continue doing that. So sometimes the curves interact with one another, and that's what creates this S-curve. So for instance, this handle is pointed out this way, and this handle is pointed out that way. These two curves are combining and creating an S-curve. We're going to have to fix that later. And I'll come here, click, and drag to create another curve. And I'm just going to do this down the line here. And I'll do it fairly quickly just for the sort of rough draft of the outline here. And I'm just clicking and dragging, and the further out you drag, the more of a curve it's going to create. And the less you drag it out, the smaller of a curve it'll create. So In the case of hair, like in this case, it's sort of up to your discretion how much hair you want to keep. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you don't want to cut out too much hair. So in this case, I'm just quickly clicking and dragging, trying to get the most hair possible while also trying to cut out some of this wall here that's behind the hair. And so now I'll come over here, click and drag. And you'll see this curve is way out of whack here, so we'll have to come back and fix that. And I'll hold Control and use my mouse wheel to zoom out. So now we don't have as many detailed parts, so I can kind of just zoom out a bit here and work on some of these larger parts. And I'll hold the space bar, and that allows me to sort of grab the canvas and then shift over using my mouse. So you'll see while I'm doing this that we are in design mode right now, which is the current edit mode. And design mode is what allows me to add these anchor points and create these handles and these segments as I move along the image. We're going to get into the other modes as we continue on with this design and as we need to tweak the line that we're drawing here. So one thing about the Paths tool is you can draw outside the canvas. So in this case, I'm creating anchor points that are outside the canvas here. And then I can zoom in and bring these points back into the canvas. And so that's pretty useful when you need to select everything that kind of goes off the canvas page, like in this case. So I'll come over here, and then I'll get it back on track here. All right, so as we are approaching the first anchor point that we drew here, what I need to do is connect these two anchor points to create a closed loop. If I try to click directly on this anchor point, you'll see it'll just select this as the active anchor point. It won't connect these. And also if I just click somewhere outside here and then click and try to just hover this over that last anchor point, that's not technically closing the loop there. So I'll just hit Control Z to undo that. What I need to do is I need to make sure I'm on one of these last anchor points and then to create what's called a union between these two, which means I'm just connecting them. What I have to do is hold Control and hover over that last anchor point there, and then I can click on that, and that will go ahead and join those two anchor points together, and now this is a closed loop. So now I'll zoom out so you guys can see the sort of rough version of the outline around our main subject here. And if I come over here to my paths dialog box, you'll see here is that new path that we drew. This is the original one that I drew, so I can just delete that. But here is the new path that we drew that goes around the girl. And you'll see that that path has now disappeared, but that's okay. We can unhide that path at any time. So that's one of the main benefits of the Paths tool is you can always come back here to the Paths dialog box and unhide that path you drew and then reuse it at any time. So I'll come back over here to my layers panel, and with my Paths tool selected still, I'll click on that path, and now that path is active again. And now I'm going to hold Control and zoom in because I want to start working on refining this. So I'm going to start by clicking on this anchor point that we drew, and I'm going to drag the handle out like so, and that's going to draw a curve around the zipper there. And then I'll click on this anchor point here, and you'll notice that when I click on it, there aren't any handles that pop up like this. So this anchor point has handles, whereas when I click on this one, nothing happens. If you have a situation like that where you have an anchor point that doesn't have a handle, what you can do is hold Control and then click and drag, and you'll see that now a handle will come out of that anchor point there. And then you can hold Control again and then click and drag again to create a handle going in the other direction. So I'll hold the space bar and just move around my image here. And so I'll come up here to this area and just tweak my handle. And sometimes what you need to do is move the anchor point out of the way to see what's going on behind it and just double check where that curve needs to be. So in this case, we've got too much going on with this handle, so I'll just bring it all the way in. And then same with this handle, it's causing this curve to sort of take on a shape that we don't want it to take on. And so now I can just readjust these handles. So I want them to be a little bit more subtle here, like so. And then I'll use my mouse wheel to scroll up. Same with this handle. This one's going way out. So what I want to do is bring that back in. And you'll see that that corrected our curve there. So now it's the right shape. And you can just sort of do that along your entire image, just changing the shape of the curves as you go to make sure it's matching the curves of the object you're trying to select. So come over here. Here you'll see that this line gets off track here a little bit, so I can just adjust that handle, bring it in a bit. And here this handle needs to be brought in quite significantly there. Same with right here. So I have elected to cut out this part of the hair right here. It's not something that I feel that I need for what I'm trying to accomplish. So if you guys want, you can include that little strip of hair right there. But in my case, I'm just going to leave it out. So hold Control and zoom out. This part gets a little crazy just with all the hair here. I'm going to move in here using my mouse wheel and the Control key. And so this handle you'll see goes way out here. And so I'm just going to bring that handle way back in, like so. So right here we have another area where the curve isn't matching the shape we want it to be, and these two anchor points right here don't actually have curves to them. So I'll hold Control again, and one thing I didn't mention before is that when you hold Control, if you look over here in the Edit mode under your Paths tool option, you'll see that the Edit mode changes from Design to Edit when you hold Control. So that's what's allowing you to add these handles here to your anchor points, and then you can adjust the curves here and get them to where you need them. All right, in this case we have a situation where I think this part is pretty important to get right. So what I want to do is add another anchor point right here. So the way I can do that is just hold Control and you'll see a little plus sign pop up when we're hovered over a segment that doesn't already have an anchor point. And now when I just click on the segment, that will go ahead and create a brand new anchor point. And now I can just adjust the curve right here. And we'll have to do the same right here, so I'll hold Control and click to create a new anchor point, and that will allow me to adjust where this is going. I don't want this to come out too much, so we'll go with about right there. And then I may need to actually add one more right here. And the goal here sometimes is to make sure that you don't have anything like any angles that are jutting out. In this case, this right here, there's sort of a hard angle where this is coming into this anchor point here. But if I zoom out, you can see at the zoomed out level, it's not super noticeable, so I'm just going to leave it as is. We'll just zoom in on this part here and continue working. All right, so now we have finished drawing our path around our subject. So what you guys can tell from the Paths tool, or what you should be able to tell here, is that the tool is super useful because what it allows you to do is accurately draw dynamic curves around objects such as this one. You can also draw just random objects on your own. You don't have to outline something. You can just create your own object if you like. So you can create your own shapes or whatever you'd like. Once you've outlined this object, there are several options for what you can do, as I mentioned before. So I'm going to start with one option, which is creating a selection from this path that we drew. So remember, this path will always be here now that we have it drawn in this composition. So what I want to do is cut the girl out from this photo here. And so the way to do that is just come over here and click Selection from Path. And now you'll see our path has a selection around it, which happens to be in the shape of the girl. And I can click off of the Paths tool to get rid of all of those anchor points and stuff that we drew. So now you can see just the girl here. And I can hit Control C, and that's going to copy everything within this shape here. And now I'll create a new composition, so I'll go to File, New, And let me just switch this over to landscape mode. So I've got 1920 by 1280 as my image width and height. So I'll click OK. And let me just change the background of this to a white color and fill this in with my bucket fill tool. So there we go. This is now a white background here. So now if I hit Control V, that'll paste my girl that we outlined right here into a new composition as a floating selection layer over here. So click on that layer and then click right here to create a new layer. And that will put the girl on her own layer. And now what I can do with this is I can grab my scale tool and just click to scale this down. I'll hold Control and Shift to make sure this is scaling from the center and also maintaining the original aspect ratio of the image. And I'll just scale this down a little bit more. And actually I can come over here to percent, and I want to change this to 65%. And let me undo that. Let me make sure this chain link icon is linked to make sure that the aspect ratio for the width and height remains the same. So I'll type 65 again, and you guys will see why I'm doing this in a little bit. But now this is scaled to 65% of its original height. And then I'll just center that up by clicking in these squares in the middle. And when I'm ready, I'll hit scale. And now we have our girl here from our other image put into this new composition here, and the background has been completely erased. So we've cut out the background of this girl, but how does the path tool play a role in the rest of the composition that we're trying to create? Well, I can come back over here to the layer of the girl or the photo of the girl and hit Control-Shift-A. That'll select none. So our path is still here, remember, and I'll come over here to our path dialog. Let me name this girl outline and hit enter. So what I can do is I can copy this path and bring it into my other composition, or I can export it. If I wanted to take the export route, let's say maybe I know I want to use this in a future composition that I'm not working on today, I can right click and go to export path, and I could save this as girloutline.svg. You always want to end your names for paths with .svg. That's just the file type that paths need to be saved as. And for whatever reason, GIMP won't automatically add the SVG to the end. And if that SVG is not there, it's not going to work. So I'll hit save, and now we've saved that. Or I can just right click and go to copy path. And then if I come over here, I can import that path that we just created by right clicking and going to import path. And then here is the file where I saved it in, the file location. So here's that path. I can just double click, and that'll bring this outline, this girl outline path into this composition. Or if I hit Control Z to undo that, I can just right click and go to paste path since we copied it earlier. And now here is that path we drew. Remember, we scaled this image down, so this path is a little bit larger than the new image size we have here. So we do have to scale the path down. The good news is that you can use transform tools on a path. So right now, the scale tool is a transform tool. You'll see over here there's an option under transform, and right now it's set to active layer, which means we would be scaling the active layer, which is the photo of the girl here. But I want to change this to scale just the path, so I'll come over here and I can change this to path, and now I can click on this path and scale this down, and I can move this over as well. And the reason that I chose 65% earlier is because now I can just come over here to percent, type in 65, and then hit the tab key, and then let me just move this into place real quick before finalizing this. And then I'll hit the scale tool, and now we've scaled down our original path to the size of the image, and now these are both the same size. So now that these are both within the same composition, I'll come back over to layers. We could start working on some of the effects with the path. I'll start though first by changing the background color, so I change this to a gradient. I'll come over here to my foreground color, and I'm going to choose this purple color that I pre-selected. You can copy my HTML notation here if you want to use the same color, and I'll click OK. And then my background color is this red color that I used, and here is my HTML notation here. And by the way, you can always save these colors by clicking this arrow, and that'll save them over here. So click OK. And now I'll grab my gradient tool here, and I have the gradient set to foreground and background RGB, and then my shape here is set to linear, and opacity is set to 100. And now I'm just going to click and drag from the middle out to the outer part of this image, and I want to actually change the shape here to radial. Because I'm using GIMP 2.10.6, I can live edit this gradient. I don't have to redraw the gradient every time. And then I could switch the colors and test them out to determine which one I like better. I'm actually going to go with this color. And then I'll just grab another tool, the move tool, to apply that gradient. And now we have a gradient behind our model here. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is create a stroke that outlines our model. And I don't wanna do it on the background layer here. I wanna do it on its own layer, and I'm going to be using the path tool to create that outline. So what I'm gonna do is first create a new layer, and I'll name this stroke outline. And this one I'll do for our white stroke outline, so I'll just name the stroke outline white. I'll set the fill width to transparency and click OK. So you'll notice that I have this layer below our main girl layer, and I'll just change the name of this to main girl. And I'll click back on the stroke outline layer so that this is our active layer. So now what I can do to stroke this path is I can come over here to my path tool, click on that path, and I can click the stroke path option here, or paint along the path. So I'll click that. And now you have the choose stroke style option here. So what's going to happen is it's going to use your foreground color as the color for the stroke. So I'll just click on that to change the foreground color. I'm going to go with white to start. So I'll choose white and click OK. And if you don't have white as one of your pre-selected colors, you can just drag this to the top left corner here. And then you could change the line width. So I'll start with 50 and see how that looks. And so I have it set to stroke line, solid color. Anti-aliasing just means it's going to smooth this line as it draws around it anytime there's a curve. And then under line style, you could choose what kind of line you want to use. I'm going to change this just to line, so it's just a straight line. You could change the cap and the joint style. The cap style is where a stroke ends, so if this were an open loop, there would be some place where the line would have to end. This is where the cap style comes in, but this is a closed loop, so we're not going to have that. Join style is going to be, and I think I just called it joint style a second ago, but joint style is whenever the line makes a turn, this is determining what that turn is going to look like. I'm going to change this to the middle option so it has sort of a curvature to it as it turns a corner. And now I'm going to hit stroke, and that went ahead and stroked the outline here that we drew with the path. And if I come over here, it put that on the stroke outline white layer here, and you'll see that creates a pretty cool effect. So now I'm going to come back to my paths dialog box here and duplicate this path, and I'll name this girl outline dotted because we're going to create a dotted line from this. So now what I'll do is, instead of trying to stroke this line again, I'm going to create a selection from it first and then manipulate the selection to create the effect I want. So I'll come down here and click right here to path to selection, and now what I'll do is go to select, grow, and I'll grow this by, let's try 15 pixels for now, and click OK. And so now that grew our selection area, so it's sort of dead in the center here, maybe a little bit off, but it looks pretty good to me. And now that I've done that, I can convert this selection back to a path. So I'll just click right here, selection to path. And so now that selection area has been turned into a path, and you'll see it's called selection here. If I hide that original girl outline dotted path, that'll go away. And if I hit Control-Shift-A, you'll see that now we have a path where that selection just was. And now what I'll do first is come over to my layers panel, create a new layer, and I'll name this stroke dotted line, and click OK. And I'll come back to my path dialog here. I'll change my foreground color to this blue color and click OK. And by the way, you can copy this HTML notation here. And now I'm going to click to paint along the path or stroke the path again. And so here we have our stroke path dialog box. I've changed the width here to 5. And then you could change the line style here, and I'll change this to normal dots. And I'll click stroke. And now if we hide that path that we created, now we have a dotted line going around that stroke that we drew. So for the next portion, I'm going to create a dissolving sort of effect. And so to do that, to start, I'm just going to create a new layer, and I'll just name this dissolve layer, and I'll hit enter. And I'm going to want this to be all the way below all of our other layers, but above the background layer. You guys will see why as we get to it. But I'll come back to my paths dialog here, and I'm going to actually use the girl outline dotted layer now for a different purpose. So I'm going to change this to girl outline dissolve and hit enter. Once I've done that, I'm going to come back over and make sure I'm on my dissolve layer here. I'll grab my paths tool and click on that path to activate the path. And I'm going to change my foreground color to this blue color here. You guys can copy my HTML notation. And first what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the edit mode of this path to move. So to do that, you'll see all I have to do is hold the Alt key. And then when I click on the path, I can shift it over a little bit. So I'll shift it to about right there. And now what I want to do is fill in this path with this foreground color here. So I'll click Fill Path, and I'll make sure this is set to solid color, and I'll keep the anti-aliasing, or anti-aliasing as I'm told it's pronounced. And I'll click the Fill option here, and that will fill in our path area with that foreground color there. And if I grab a different tool and then come over here and hide this path, you guys can see what I created there. I'll come back over to my layers panel, make sure I'm clicked on this dissolve layer. I'm going to change the layer mode here to dissolve, which is actually the first option under the normal option. And you won't see anything yet, but if I go to filters, blur, Gaussian blur, and I turn the blur up, you'll see that instead of blur, it's going to create this sort of dissolving look, this almost like particulate sort of look to this. And I'll click OK. And I can duplicate this dissolve layer. So now I have two. And I'll grab my move tool and I'll hold control to put this in straight line mode as I move it to the left a little bit. And now we have these dissolving shapes going on behind our model here. All right, so next what I'm going to do is colorize the girl here, and this doesn't have to do really with the pass tool. This is just an effect I thought looked cool. I'll come over here to the main girl and just duplicate this. And so I'll name this main girl blue. And what I'll do is I'll just go to Colors, Colorize, and now I'm going to change the color of this to that blue color we've been using. And I'll click OK. And I'll click OK again. So Colorize is just going to convert everything to different shades of that color I just chose, so different shades of that blue. And then I'll just come over here to our layer mode, and I'll change this to soft light, and that will give our girl a nice blue tint there. And then I'll just adjust the opacity a little bit to turn down the effect of this. So we'll go about right there. All right, so getting back to the path tool, I'm just going to add an outline around the girl here, a blue outline. So come back over to my paths, and I'm just going to come back to our original girl outline path here, and I'm going to come over here and create a new layer, and I'll just name this blue stroke outline and hit enter. And I can keep this at the very top because it's not going to overlap anything. And real quick, I'll just change this color to that blue we've been using again, and I'll click OK. I'll grab the path tool, I can click on the path here, and then hit stroke path. And just so you guys aren't confused, there are two ways of stroking the path, so you can do what I just did there, clicking on the path with the path tool and then clicking stroke path, or coming over to the path dialog and clicking this option here, paint along the path, and those both achieve the same thing, just so you guys aren't confused about that. But I'll hit stroke path, and I'm going to increase the line width a little bit and make sure that my line style is still set to line here, and I'll hit stroke. And if I grab another tool and hide that path, you'll see now our girl has a blue stroke going around the outline. So a couple last things I want to touch upon with the path tool. Number one is that you can grab the path tool and create multiple components. So just so you guys know, a component is when you have, for example, a closed loop like I've been talking about. So when I create a union between this last anchor point I drew and the first one by holding Control and then clicking, this closed loop here is actually called a component. If I hold Shift and click outside of this component, it starts a new component, and these two will be connected, which means they will have the same settings here. So if I create a union here between these two paths, now we have two components, and I'll hold Shift and create a third component here, and hold Control and click. So now whatever I do to one of these components will occur to all three. So if I create a selection from the path, all three will have a selection area. I'll hit Control Shift A to undo that. If I stroke the path with specific settings here, and let's change the line style to medium dashes and hit stroke. And if I grab a different tool, you'll see all three of these have that same stroke. So basically, anytime you draw multiple components by holding the Shift key, you'll see that they will take on the same characteristics as one another. And if I come over here to the path dialog, I can show or hide these paths, and you'll notice that they are all on the same layer here. So they aren't on different path layers. They are all one path on the same path layer. I'm just going to delete that because we don't actually need that. And I'm going to undo actually just drawing those paths in general. And actually, let me come back here and just re-delete that since I hit Control Z. Another thing to keep in mind, if I grab my text tool and I click here and let me just type path, what I can do is I can right click and I can go to path from text. And now if I come over here to my path dialog, I now have a path in the shape of that text. So if I hide the text, you'll see that this is now in the shape of a path. So the benefit of that is I can now come over here and let's say I create a selection from that path, and I'll create a new layer, and I'll just name this text gradient and hit enter. Now I can grab a gradient and I can fill in that selection area. I'll hit enter, and now we have, and I'll hit Control-Shift-A to deselect that and hide this path. Now we have text that is a gradient instead of just being one solid color. So that's a cool effect there. You can also do something else where you can type your text along a path. So let's say, for example, using my path tool, which I grabbed over here, I'll draw a curve. And now I'll grab a text tool again, and I'll type text along path. So what I need to do is come over and make sure that this path that I drew is selected here. And I'll come back over to my layers. If I right click on this text with my text tool still selected, I can come here to text along path, and that is going to draw my text along that current active path I have. So now if I create a new layer here, and I'll just name this, I can come over here, create a selection from this path again, and I can again fill this in with a gradient if I want. I'll hit enter, Control-Shift-A, and let me hide that path and hide this one as well. So now we have text here that's going along a curve, and that can just create some cool effects. So I'll just delete these because I don't want these in the final, and same with all these text layers I just created. So as you can see, there are a lot of great uses for the paths tool here within GIMP. You can cut out objects, you can select objects, you can stroke paths, you can create shapes, and really do all sorts of cool effects and techniques, all using this one versatile tool. So that's it for this tutorial. If you liked it, please check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/daviesmediadesign. You can also visit our website at daviesmediadesign.com, and you can enroll in our GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher. You can also support us on Patreon, and we'll be going over how to create this composition here on our Patreon page in another tutorial, so definitely check that out. And I'll include all of those links, plus any other relevant links from this tutorial in the description of the video. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.